The morning sun rose over the quiet suburban streets, painting the neighborhood in hues of gold and pink. It was early autumn, and the air carried a crispness that hinted at the changing seasons. Among the scattered leaves, a dog roamed the sidewalks, its steps purposeful yet unhurried. The animal, unnamed by anyone in the area but familiar to all, was a regular sight. Known for its watchful eyes and gentle demeanor, the dog had become something of a guardian for the neighborhood. This morning, however, was different. The dog's usual routine took it past the local park, where children often played and families gathered. As it approached a row of dumpsters near the edge of the park, the animal slowed. Its ears perked, its body tensing as a faint sound reached its keen hearing. A soft cry, barely audible, floated through the air. The dog froze, its nose twitching as it picked up an unfamiliar scent. Without hesitation, the animal moved toward the source of the sound. Its paws crunched against the gravel as it approached a battered dumpster tucked behind an overgrown hedge. The crying grew louder, more insistent as the dog neared. It sniffed at the base of the container, its instincts urging it to act. Inside the dumpster, wrapped in a thin blanket, lay a baby. The child's face was flushed from crying, its tiny fists waving weakly in the cool morning air. The blanket, stained and tattered, offered little protection against the chill. The dog stood on its hind legs, its front paws resting against the edge of the dumpster as it peered inside. For a moment, it simply stared, its intelligent eyes taking in the helpless form before it. The dog let out a sharp bark, a sound that echoed through the empty streets. It barked again, its tone insistent, as if calling for help. But the neighborhood was still, its residents just beginning to stir. The animal knew it couldn't wait. It needed to act. Carefully, the dog gripped the edge of the blanket with its teeth, lifting the baby from the dumpster with surprising gentleness. The child whimpered but did not cry out, its small body cradled securely in the blanket. With the baby held firmly, the dog began to move. Its destination was clear. The hospital, located a few blocks away, was a place the dog had seen countless times during its wanderings. It had watched ambulances come and go, their flashing lights and blaring sirens a constant reminder of the care that waited within those walls. The dog quickened its pace, its paws pounding against the pavement as it carried the precious bundle. The streets were still quiet, the early hour ensuring few witnesses to the unusual sight. A jogger paused mid-stride, their eyes widening as they took in the scene. "Is that a baby?" they murmured, frozen in place as the dog darted past. Others soon noticed as well, a shopkeeper sweeping the sidewalk, a mail carrier starting their route. Each person stared in astonishment as the dog raced toward the hospital, the baby clutched securely in its jaws. By the time the animal reached the hospital's emergency entrance, a small crowd had gathered, their murmurs of disbelief growing louder. The automatic doors slid open and the dog stepped inside, its claws clicking against the polished floor. Nurses and doctors turned, their faces a mix of confusion and concern as they took in the sight before them. A nurse approached cautiously, her hands outstretched. What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The dog gently set the baby down on the floor, stepping back but not leaving. It sat, its eyes fixed on the child as if ensuring the nurses understood the urgency. The nurse scooped the baby into her arms, her expression shifting from shock to determination as she called for assistance. Within moments, the emergency room was a flurry of activity. The baby was rushed away for immediate care, its cries fading as the staff worked to stabilize it, but the dog didn't move. It remained seated by the entrance, its watchful gaze following the nurses until the baby disappeared from view. The crowd outside pressed against the glass doors, their faces etched with awe as they whispered about the heroic animal that had defied all expectations. The hospital staff soon turned their attention to the dog, unsure of what to do. One doctor knelt before it, his eyes searching the animal's face for an explanation. "How did you know?" he asked softly, though he didn't expect an answer. The dog, calm and unwavering, simply sat, its presence a silent testament to the extraordinary events of the morning. The emergency room buzzed with activity as nurses and doctors worked to stabilize the baby. The child, though cold and weak, responded quickly to the warmth and care provided by the staff. Within minutes, the color returned to the baby's cheeks, and its cries grew stronger, a sound that filled the hospital with a bittersweet sense of relief. Meanwhile, the dog remained near the entrance, its eyes never straying far from the hallway where the baby had been taken. It refused to budge, despite attempts by staff to coax it outside. "It's like he knows he's done something incredible," one nurse whispered to her colleague, who nodded in agreement. In the pediatric unit, Dr. Miriam Evans, a seasoned physician with decades of experience, reviewed the baby's vitals. Her face was calm, but her mind raced with questions. How had this baby ended up in such a state? And more importantly, who had abandoned it? The blanket in which the baby had been wrapped was examined for clues. It was thin and worn, bearing no identifying marks. A faint scent of garbage clung to it, confirming the staff's suspicions that the child had been discarded in the dumpster. Dr. Evans sighed deeply, her hand resting lightly on the baby's tiny chest. "You're lucky," she murmured. "That dog saved your life." Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a hospital social worker. "Any updates?" the woman asked, her clipboard tucked under her arm. Dr. Evans shook her head. "The baby's stable, but there's no identification, no note, no name, nothing." The social worker frowned, jotting down notes. "I'll notify the authorities. They'll want to investigate the circumstances of the abandonment." As the baby slept peacefully in the incubator, Dr. Evans couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to the story. She made her way back to the emergency room, where the dog still sat. Its posture calm but vigilant. The crowd outside had thinned, but a few onlookers lingered, snapping photos and sharing the remarkable tale. Dr. Evans crouched in front of the dog, her kind eyes meeting its steady gaze. "You're not just a stray, are you?" she said softly. "You knew exactly what to do." The dog tilted its head slightly, its expression almost human in its understanding. Dr. Evans reached out a hand, and the dog leaned forward, allowing her to gently scratch behind its ears. "Good boy," she said with a smile. "Or girl. Whatever you are, you're a hero." Just then, one of the nurses approached, her face pale and her voice low. "Dr. Evans, you need to see this." The nurse led Dr. Evans to the small room where the baby's blanket had been placed for further examination. Spread out on a sterile table, the fabric revealed a shocking detail, a faint but unmistakable bloodstain in the corner. Dr. Evans's heart sank as she studied it, her mind racing with implications. "Is it the baby's?" she asked. "We're not sure," the nurse replied, "but it's enough to suggest foul play." Dr. Evans's chest tightened as the weight of the discovery settled over her. "We need to involve the police immediately," she said. "This isn't just an abandonment. It could be something far worse." Back in the emergency room, the dog seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. It stood, its ears twitching, as if anticipating the next step. Dr. Evans approached it again, her voice gentle but firm. "I don't know how, but you've already helped more than you can imagine. Now, we need to figure out the rest." The authorities arrived shortly after, their presence adding to the tension in the hospital. Officers spoke with Dr. Evans, collecting details about the baby's condition and the dog's extraordinary actions. One officer knelt by the dog, offering it a treat, which it accepted cautiously. "This animal might be the key to solving this case," the officer remarked. "It's clearly not a regular stray." The dog's actions left everyone wondering, had it witnessed something? Could it lead them to answers? And if so, how had it known to bring the baby to safety? As the hospital settled into a quieter rhythm, the dog lay down near the entrance, its eyes half closed, but its posture alert. It was as if it knew its job wasn't finished yet. Dr. Evans stood by the window, watching as the officers gathered their evidence. In her heart, she felt a growing respect for the dog's instinct and courage. Whatever the outcome of the investigation, one thing was certain. This animal had given the baby a second chance. But the mystery was far from over, and the truth, when it emerged, would shake them all. The investigation into the baby's abandonment moved swiftly. Police officers combed through the evidence, starting with the dumpster where the child was found. The area had been cordoned off, and forensic teams scoured it for anything that might provide a clue. Bits of fabric, a discarded bottle, and faint traces of blood were collected and sent to the lab for analysis. Meanwhile, the dog remained at the hospital, its calm yet watchful presence a source of comfort for the staff. It stayed near the entrance, as if waiting for some unseen signal. Many of the nurses had taken to calling it Guardian, a name that seemed to fit its noble demeanor. Detective Carter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving tough cases, arrived at the hospital that afternoon. He was a tall, no-nonsense man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. After speaking with Dr. Evans and reviewing the baby's condition, he approached the dog. "So, you're the hero," he said, crouching to meet the animal's gaze. The dog looked back at him steadily, its tail wagging slightly. "You've already done more than most people would. Let's see if you can help us finish the job." Detective Carter had an idea. He retrieved a small blanket from the dumpster, its scent still strong. Holding it out to the dog, he said, "Can you take us back? Show us where this started?" The dog sniffed the blanket, its nose twitching as it processed the scent. For a moment it stood still, then turned toward the door, looking back at Carter expectantly. The detective exchanged a glance with his partner, Officer Ramirez, who nodded. "Let's see where this goes." Guardian led the officers out of the hospital and into the streets, its pace steady but deliberate. The small crowd that had gathered outside watched in amazement as the dog guided the authorities through the neighborhood. It wove through alleys and side streets, its nose close to the ground. The trail eventually led them to an abandoned lot near the edge of town. Overgrown weeds and broken fencing surrounded the area, giving it a desolate, eerie feel. The dog stopped near a rusted-out car, its ears perking up as it sniffed around the base. Detective Carter motioned for the team to move carefully. "Spread out," he said. "Look for anything unusual." As the officers searched the lot, Guardian began barking near a pile of debris. Carter and Ramirez hurried over, their flashlights illuminating the area. Beneath the debris, they found a small, torn bag that matched the fabric of the blanket the baby had been wrapped in. Inside the bag were more startling clues. A half-empty bottle of formula, a pacifier, and a scrap of paper with hastily scribbled writing. Carter held the note up to the light. The words were faint but legible. "I had no choice. Forgive me." Ramirez let out a low whistle. "Looks like someone left this in a hurry." Carter's jaw tightened. Whoever abandoned the baby didn't just walk away. They felt conflicted. There's more to this story. The dog let out another bark, drawing their attention to a nearby pathway leading into the woods. It moved with urgency, its tail wagging as if encouraging them to follow. Carter hesitated for only a moment before signaling the team to proceed. The path wound deeper into the woods, the thick canopy above casting long shadows on the ground. Guardian's pace quickened, its nose leading the way. Finally, the dog stopped near a small makeshift campsite. A tattered blanket lay spread out on the ground, surrounded by empty cans and a small fire pit. "This was where they stayed," Carter said, kneeling to inspect the site. "Probably before they left the baby." He picked up a charred photograph from the ashes, its edges burned but the faces still visible. It showed a young woman cradling a baby, her expression one of tired affection. The resemblance to the infant at the hospital was unmistakable. "They were running from something," Ramirez said, his voice low. "Maybe someone. Look at how hastily this was abandoned." Carter nodded grimly. "We need to find her. If she felt forced to leave the baby, there's a good chance she's in danger too." Back at the hospital, Dr. Evans kept a close watch on the baby, her heart heavy with questions. She couldn't stop thinking about the circumstances that had brought the child to her care. Guardian returned with the officers, its demeanor calm but resolute. It settled near the entrance again, as if waiting for the next chapter of the story to unfold. Detective Carter briefed Dr. Evans on the findings. "We've got some leads," he said. "The mother might have been fleeing a dangerous situation. If that's the case, we're not just looking at abandonment, we're looking at survival." Dr. Evans nodded, her thoughts racing. "That child deserves answers," she said firmly. "And so does the mother." The dog watched quietly as the hospital buzzed with the news. Its steady gaze seemed to hold a message. The journey wasn't over yet. The following morning, Detective Carter received a breakthrough. The forensic team had analyzed the items found at the campsite and traced the formula bottle to a local store. Surveillance footage showed a young woman purchasing the formula just days earlier, her disheveled appearance matching the desperate circumstances hinted at by the note. Carter's team immediately distributed the woman's image, hoping to locate her before it was too late. Meanwhile, Guardian remained at the hospital, a steadfast presence that continued to draw attention from staff and visitors alike. The dog had become a symbol of hope and resilience, its actions inspiring everyone who heard the story. Dr. Evans, who had grown particularly fond of the dog, noticed a shift in its behavior that afternoon. Guardian paced near the entrance, its ears twitching and its body tense. "What's wrong, boy?" she asked, crouching to stroke its fur. The dog barked once, then twice, before turning toward the door and staring intently at the parking lot. Moments later, a commotion broke out near the entrance. A young woman, her clothes torn and her face streaked with tears, stumbled into the hospital lobby. She clutched a small bag to her chest, her wide eyes scanning the room frantically. "It's her," a nurse whispered, recognizing the woman from the surveillance photo shared by the police. The woman's gaze fell on Guardian, and she froze. The dog barked again, its tail wagging as it stepped closer to her. Tears streamed down the woman's face as she dropped to her knees, her voice trembling. You found him," she whispered, reaching out to the dog. Detective Carter arrived moments later, alerted by hospital staff. He approached cautiously, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, we need to talk. Are you the baby's mother?" The woman nodded, her sobs intensifying. "Yes," she choked out. "I didn't know what else to do. I thought he'd be safer without me." Carter's expression softened, though his questions remained pointed. "Why did you leave him? What were you running from?" The woman took a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears. "It was his father," she said finally. He hurt me. He threatened to hurt my baby. I thought if I left him where someone would find him, he'd have a chance, a better life than I could give him." Dr. Evans, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. Her voice was gentle as she said, "You did what you thought was best in an impossible situation. But now we can help both of you." The woman looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Is he okay? My baby, is he okay?" "He's safe," Dr. Evans assured her. "He's healthy, and he's been cared for, and he's waiting for you." The woman broke down again, her cries echoing through the lobby. Guardian stayed by her side, nuzzling her hand as if to reassure her. The dog's quiet strength seemed to give her the courage to stand and follow Carter and Dr. Evans to the pediatric unit. When they reached the nursery, the woman hesitated, her hands gripping the doorframe. Dr. Evans placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Go ahead," she said. "He's right there." The woman stepped inside, her eyes locking on the incubator where her baby lay sleeping. She covered her mouth with her hands, her tears flowing freely as she approached. "My sweet boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." The baby stirred, his tiny hands reaching toward the sound of her voice. The woman gently lifted him into her arms, holding him close as she rocked back and forth. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment palpable. Detective Carter watched from the doorway, his expression thoughtful. "You'll need to file a report," he said softly, "but we'll make sure you get the help you need." The woman nodded, her gaze never leaving her son. "Thank you," she said, "for finding him, for giving him back to me." Dr. Evans glanced at Guardian, who sat quietly in the corner, its eyes watchful. "You can thank him," she said with a smile. "He's the one who saved your baby." The woman knelt beside the dog, her hand resting gently on its head. "You're an angel," she whispered. "I'll never forget what you did for us." The days that followed were filled with hope and healing. The young mother, whose name was revealed to be Elena, began receiving support from social services to help her rebuild her life. The hospital staff worked closely with the authorities to ensure she and her baby were safe, far from the reach of the abusive environment she had fled. Elena stayed at the hospital for a few days while arrangements were made. During that time, she rarely left her son's side, holding him close as if making up for the time they had been apart. The bond between them was undeniable, and her determination to protect him was unshakable. Guardian, the dog whose bravery had set everything in motion, remained a constant presence. It had become something of a celebrity at the hospital, with visitors stopping to take pictures and staff sneaking it treats whenever they could. But despite the attention, Guardian seemed most content near Elena and her baby, often lying quietly at their feet. Dr. Evans took a special interest in Guardian's future. "A dog like this deserves more than just gratitude," she said one afternoon as she scratched behind the animal's ears. "He deserves a home." Elena smiled as she watched Guardian interact with her son, who giggled each time the dog's tail wagged. "He's already a part of our family," she said softly. "If it's okay, I'd like to adopt him. He saved my son's life. I owe him everything." Dr. Evans's face lit up. "I think that's a wonderful idea. You're exactly what he needs, a family to love him." Detective Carter stopped by later that evening to check on Elena and share an update. "We've apprehended your ex," he told her. "He won't be able to hurt you or your son anymore." Elena let out a shaky breath, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling, "for everything." Carter nodded, his expression softening. "You've been through a lot, but you're stronger than you think. And with this guy around," he added, gesturing to Guardian, "you've got a protector who won't let anything happen to you." The day Elena and her son were discharged from the hospital was bittersweet. The staff gathered to bid them farewell, many of them wiping away tears as they hugged her goodbye. Guardian stood proudly at her side, his tail wagging as if sensing the significance of the moment. As Elena stepped outside, holding her baby close, she paused to take in the crisp autumn air. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. Guardian trotted beside her, his head held high as they walked toward a waiting car that would take them to their new home. Months later, Eleanor sent a letter to Dr. Evans and the hospital staff, accompanied by a photo. In the picture, Eleanor stood in front of a cozy home, her baby nestled in her arms and Guardian sitting proudly by her side. The caption read, "Thank you for giving us a second chance. We'll never forget your kindness." Dr. Evans placed the photo on the hospital's bulletin board, where it quickly became a source of inspiration for everyone who saw it. Guardian's story was a reminder that heroes come in all forms, and even the smallest acts of courage can change lives forever. As for Guardian, he adjusted quickly to his new role as a family dog. He was no longer a stray wandering the streets, but a beloved companion who had found his place in the world. Each day he stood watch over Elena and her son, his quiet strength a testament to the bond they shared. And though the circumstances that brought them together were tragic, their story was one of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found. If this powerful story of courage, love, and second chances moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's celebrate the everyday heroes who inspire us all.